Hello, this is the Wednesday wind down event this week. It's about neurodiversity, wellbeing and the arts. This event is part of the union's student officer team's series of wellbeing events. My name is Kirsty Appleton. I'm the union's faculty organiser for arts and humanities, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm going to be hosting this event today, and today our panel will be discussing the question, what can a post-pandemic neurodiversity-led university look like, and exploring this concept through performances. We will be recording this event and we will hopefully be able to share an edited version of this in the future. Before we start the panel discussions and the performances, I'm just going to go over some of the unions and university house rules. So the union wishes to provide a safe and friendly online community environment for everyone. Contributions must be civil and tasteful. Please no disruptive, offensive or abusive behaviour. Any harassment or offensive material is not acceptable. No spamming, please. Please do not give out any personal data. The views expressed in this stream are those of the individual and not necessarily those of the union. The moderator have the right to hide your comments. Further breaches may result in being removed from the chat. In this event, it's possible that we will touch on areas that may be sensitive or upsetting, or use words that mean different things in different contexts. We'll be using a working definition of neurodiversity based on King's College London's definition, and this can be found in our event description and in the chat. This is an inclusive space. We welcome LGBTQIA+ people, people of colour, neurodivergent and disabled people. We do not welcome transphobia and trans exclusion, misogyny and sexism, racism, ableism, anti-Black and other forms of racism as Islamophobia, classism and sexuality-based oppression. Please use preferred pronouns, share openly, listen actively, ask questions, learn, unlearn, allow yourselves to be challenged. There are more details on ensuring an inclusive space posted in the chat. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass over to Dr. Syng now to get our discussion and our performances started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsty. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking time to be here. Of the very busy academic year and how exhausted everyone is. So thank you for taking time to be here. So my name is Kai and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior lecturer at the Department of Art and Performance. Delighted today to have a session where we can share how we understand neurodiversity. And we have a mixed panel, a panel of students and staff, and I think it would be fair to say that we're really key to conversations and to catalyze and stimulate some thinking around what neurodiversity is and what it could be. And which is also why we have framed an ambitious question around today's session. What can a post-pandemic neurodiversity-led university look like? So people who are here might be familiar with the term neurodiversity, and people might have attended talks and workshops and support sessions around neurodiversity. But the reason for framing and kind of deliberately pushing forward such a big question is to invite us to not only talk about some of the issues that we're facing today, but to invite us to open up a conversation about imagining how things can be. So it's not just about the issues now, but how things can be and how things could become, how things should become even. So this is an invitation. We may not have clear answers or responses, and in fact that is not going to be the key point. I think we want to I think the key point is to stimulate discussions around this imagination. So I will very, very quickly now just try to open up the session to my fellow collaborators here this afternoon. And we're delighted to have a really fantastic panel. Shall I introduce everyone? Or I think maybe a good way forward is that I'm going to call upon people with my authority. I'm going to call upon the first person in the panel today. And what's happening today is that there will be a mixture of performances and provocations and sharing of opinions and sharing of some thoughts. So we welcome you to share your feedback, responses. So you feel free to type in your questions and responses in the chat. And perhaps there is also an option, Kirsty, if people want to share their thoughts anonymously, could they type their feedback to you directly, and then you could share that?
Yep, so I think in the Q&A section at the bottom, it should be, hopefully you'll be able to see that on your screens, people watching. There is a option to ask questions. You can choose to ask these anonymously or with your name. So if you want to ask something anonymously, just pop it in there. Or if that doesn't seem to work, you can message me directly and I'll make sure that that's anonymous for you.
Great, thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Marina Hata forward. So Marina is an international undergraduate student at Manchester School of Theatre, and she openly identifies herself as neurodivergent and aims to work towards an acting industry that is much more inclusive. So Marina, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So for my original plan was to do a monologue first and then talk about my experience as a Manchester School of Theatre student as a neurodiversity person. But I thought maybe acting is probably not so common thing as I imagine. So I'm gonna first talk about my experience, if that's all right. Then I'll do the monologue afterwards. If that's not all right, please say it now. I'm gonna start. Okay, I'll start. So I'm Marina Hata, first year undergraduate student at MST, Manchester School of Theatre, and it's a part of Manchester School of Art. So theatres and rehearsal rooms are generally loud and often chaotic. And being an ensemble is one of the key elements of our training. But since I can remember, I was a loner in a class and I couldn't figure out how naturally everyone gathered and enjoyed a random conversation with multiple speaking voices going on at the same time. So why did I fall in love with theater in the first place? Because in plays, there are roles assigned to everyone. There are certain relationships given to me and I don't need to guess. I don't have to figure out what's there, who's there, and what's going on, because all of them are written in the script, which means that I can actually see the relationship. And therefore, I wouldn't be wrong in a situation. That happens to me a lot in the real life. So in the plays, it felt really safe and I felt empowered with words, and I can explore the relationships and the play and the context and using my impulses fully, not without being intimidating or whatever. So that was a pretty simple thing for me to fall in love with theater for me. However, when it comes to actor training itself, it's not sometimes simple at all. Firstly, it requires mental and physical stamina because we challenge ourselves and explore extremities within us. And most of the established ways to train actors are of course like developed based on neurotypical people's brain works. Neurotypical people is the people who don't identify themselves as neurodivergent people. And I personally was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 15 years old. So, well, obviously there is no clear method that works for every single one. So everyone should have been able to, everyone should find their own way to read, to do acting in a simple way. So otherwise everyone should have been a great actor if there is a clear method that everyone can learn from. So everyone needs to repeat try and error process. That's obvious. But on the other hand, it's not really hard to imagine that it's extra challenging sometimes for neurodivergent people because the training often involves with improvisation and impulsive screaming. And again, which I need to protect myself before I get sensory overload. So the hypersensitivity can be classified as one of its common traits, but neurodiversity is really hard to define as each brain works differently. So in my case, the line between verbal and nonverbal communication and input-output is very, very clear and strict. So, for example, when I concentrate on someone's nonverbal expression, for example, facial, body language, etc., I cannot focus on what they're verbally saying, nor I come up with any actual words as a response, because I'm focusing on the other people or what they're doing. So if I chose to listen to their words, I won't be able to pick up their intentions. So this is sometimes problematic, not only in our daily lives, but also in classes, like involves improvisations, because we need to take cues both verbally and non-verbally and organize our thoughts and come up with some lines or words to say to the other person. So sometimes it's really, really challenging. And the term often comes up in actor training is to step out of your comfort zone. And it is really essential skill to train if you want to be a character, like which is not your life at all. And the character's life is full of hardships quite often. So the question I often ask myself concerning comfort zone is, should I go with its vibrant energy with loud music, even though it feels too loud because it's not yet painful for me? Or should I say, like, could you turn it down please a bit in order to prevent a possible sensory overload, even though it might stop the flow which we put our energy to create as ensemble? Or another time, like looking at someone's eyes during conversation, whether it's scripted or not, it's sometimes uncomfortable. But even many neurotypical people feel it intimidating as well. So does that mean I should bear it as well? Because that will help my partner read how I'm feeling. So there are vague questions really that I always have when I take classes. And ultimately, should I mask and hide my impulsive behavior for most of my time on the stage, unless the character stated autistic, so on and so forth? But what we train ourselves is, in my point of view, to be with a person in front of you as a human being with a given story. So in short, real communication with a given circumstances. So what is real? What is real, in fact? What if real for neurotypical people feels unrelatable for neurodivergent actors? These are also questions that I want to keep asking as I continue study here. And we can easily imagine that these are going to be long-standing questions for neurodivergent people, and even for not neurotypical people as well. Because in the end, we are all human, and there shouldn't be a line like separate one to other. So nobody has an answer, and I really appreciate that teachers and classmates are truly supportive, and they're willing to turn down light or music whenever it's too much for me. However, I'm just one of many people who identifies themselves as neurodivergent actors. And it shouldn't be just one-time measure for myself, like, oh, okay, so Marina is in here, so we should be care about noises. I think it shouldn't be like that. And if we could come up with another way, more diverse and inclusive ways to approach acting alongside my study at MSD, MMU, I couldn't be more happier.
Thank you so much, Marina, for sharing that. And as you can see, some of us are clapping our hands. It's really interesting to hear what you were sharing in terms of these sort of the interesting tension between the need to, the comfort of being assigned kind of prescribed roles, and then to have to go out of the comfort zone and to improvise. And I like what you were saying in terms of impulsive screaming. so that's a really interesting tension that a lot of neurodivergent people have to kind of navigate, like in their everyday lives. And thank you for also sharing what you were saying in terms of how in the end we are all human. I think in the beginning we are also all human, so that's really that's really something interesting to remember. And one of the things that people who identify themselves as disabled, and of course people who are neurodivergent may not necessarily identify themselves as disabled, but in disability there is the kind of classic line: if something works for a small group of people, it will work for a larger group of people, it will work for the majority of people. And this is something that we can kind of think about as we move on in today's session. Marina's presentation also can open up a discussion about intersectionality. Marina introduced herself as an international student, and in some of our discussions we were talking about how languages, in a way, being neurodivergent can be thought about as a kind of a language, in that it is a kind of, because we were talking about how English is not necessarily our mother tongue, and then adopting this language, and then what about trying to read people who are not neurodivergent, and how that works, and can that be thought about as a kind of language? But of course, it's also important to think about the another well-known saying in neurodivergent circles, which is that when you meet one person who is autistic or neurodivergent, you've met one person, everyone is completely different. So thank you, Marina, for that. Next up, maybe could we have maybe Siobhan to be the next person to speak, if that's okay. So Siobhan Berry is a senior lecturer in the School of Architecture, and Siobhan is also the disability coordinator for the school and the co-chair of the university's Disabled Staff Forum. So Siobhan, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Kai. Thanks, Kirsty, for organising this, and Marina, that was lovely. It really was, and I think you've said pretty much what I was going to say, which is better because it means we're right as staff. That students coming to university are photographed, they're assigned a candidate number, they're given a timetable, they have assessments, and it can be quite easy to find yourself as one of 100, 200 faces in a lecture theatre, and you start to feel, are you going to be processed as a group? And there are group skills that you need to learn, but ultimately, as neurodiversity is an individual condition, universities deal with individual people from different places, on different journeys and with different backgrounds and ambitions. And part of the reason why we have lecturers who are really interested and volunteer to be the disabled coordinator for their department is so that the students feel that there is somebody who understands your subject area. We're the subject specialists, and we know how to help you interpret the advice that you've been given and your coping strategies, so that you do have a personalised learning experience. That's not to say that you're treated differently in any way or separately. What you are is treated with equity. There's a saying, if you give everyone 2 oranges, not everybody needs 2 oranges. So what we do is, first of all, we get to know you as students. And once you've been teaching for a while, you can get to know many students pretty quickly. And we identify needs. If you haven't come to higher education with those needs identified, we will talk to you. We'll go, we think there's a little difference in the way perhaps you approach this project. Can we help? What works for you? And then we adjust the way that you learn. And if necessary, we can even adjust the way that you're assessed. But I think for me, the most magical thing about studying and teaching in architecture is we have to understand the people we design for. So we have an instinctive interest in the way people work. And we care about well-being and an environment, and we're an environment of education. So, you know, it's kind of, we're drawn to this because we want to, and professionally because we can. And when I was considering what I was going to say about neurodiversity, I wondered whether or not I should mention whether I was neurodiverse or not do that. And I thought, well, maybe, yeah, I should actually, because being a large school, a large university, the School of Architecture, we have students from all different backgrounds, different ages, and there is still to some degree a little stigma, that's to put it mildly. And I think it's important that students are empowered to say, this is how I am. And I will accommodate myself in this environment, and that staff will do the same thing. So that's why, you know, you've got lecturers here today saying, we're just like you, to the extent that anyone is like anyone else. And when you go to the disability service, and I know that's a contentious term, it's going to become inclusion, I think, isn't it, Isabel? But not all neurodiverse people consider themselves disabled. So we have an inclusion service, and then we can make things better and make things right for you. And by learning that, we make things right for everybody else. And I thought it'd be interesting to share, because as this is about wellbeing in the arts, that neurodiversity is described often in higher education as a term along with cognizance, learning, how we pick things up, how we remember. And the differences that we have are in our brains, in our neural systems, in the way that we remember and we respond to things. And our brain takes up not very much of our body, really, considering the size of it, but it takes up almost 20% of our energy. And if our energy is being used and we're having to be in a different situation, that's even more energy, and that will affect our well-being. That will then have impacts on our mental health. It will have impacts on our ability to join in a way that's effective for us. It's not always comfortable, but it has to be effective. And like Marina had said, if you're so uncomfortable, you can't be effective. So at university, the tutors, the staff, all the staff want to learn what works for everybody, because something that we do individually for one person nearly always can be successful at scale for other people. And the more people are diagnosed or come forward, the more other people go, well, actually, I identify with that. That helps me too. And it becomes a better place to be for everybody, the students and the staff. We learn as much from the students as you will learn from our curriculum, if not more. And I think the statistics aren't great. In the world, perhaps 1 in 3, 1 in 5 people would be on a spectrum of some neurodiversity. That then becomes even less through schools. Further education, it comes down even more. And then you get to higher education, and you would think it's rare, but actually it's not. What happens is you just become better at executive functioning, pass, basically. And that takes up energy, that has an emotional toll. And that is an unnecessary emotional toll, and that energy can be channeled much more successfully in whatever your subject areas are. Now, in architecture, we design things. We look at spaces, we look at how people react, we look at what people want to do and what they need, and we balance arts with the technical side of how do I make that happen. But part of learning, part of cognition is intrinsically tied to emotion, and that means we have to be happy. And being neurodiverse and getting this far in life, you will know that you haven't always been comfortable, you haven't always been happy. And we try as best as we can to stretch you. We really want you to push and get out of your comfort zone, but not to the point where it's damaging, to the point where you develop neuroplasticity and emotional intellectual plasticity and become more resilient and become better. And having already got here, you are experts at that. And we want to learn from you to help other people and to make it just better, because neurodiversity is great. Sadly, so many neurodivergent people don't have the success that the famous people do, you know, like Einstein and the ones on the posters. But as I began at the beginning, you come here as an individual with a set of parents and families and ambitions and feelings, and you might then feel you're a candidate number, but you're going to leave as individuals with a group of friends and memories and knowledge and skills. And we really want to push those, so they're the best skills that you can then go on and share in society as well, and reflect on your time here really positively and help us out, contribute, stay, join the staff and help the body to get better. So I hope that makes students and staff listening think, yeah, I want to say I'm on that team. I want to join in and I want to feel comfortable. That's the main thing. We know you're clever, you're already at uni. We know that you're resilient and you're brave. But we want you to be comfortable and to be successful, and crucially going on to be effective. So yeah, that's my, I wouldn't call that a performance, but that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, for that performance / declaration. And as pointed out, being neurodivergent and neurodiversity is quite an under-discussed issue in higher education settings. Even within disability discourses, because it is something that is invisible. It is not visual. It is not something that you can see. And it is also something that is not talked about. And there's not a lot of awareness around it. And so, Siobhan, when you said you were happy to be identified as neurodivergent as a staff member, I think that is quite significant, because many people, especially women and girls, are very, very, very well documented, very well researched to be very good at passing and camouflaging, and to be quite socialized. So we know how to look neuronormative. We know how to look like the next person. And that often comes at a very high price to many people. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in my work is to highlight how staff members, how neurodiversity is something that we need to talk about, not just at student level, but staff level as well. So I'm very keen to maybe open this up in the discussion later. But for now, it would be really good to hear from Afrodita. And Afrodita is a senior research assistant, and Afrodita works across disciplines and works with creative arts-based methods and poetry as a way of knowing and being, with research interests in creative arts interventions and spoken word poetry for transforming adversity and well-being beyond illness with traditionally underserved communities. Sorry, I am dyslexic, so that there will always be Freudian slips. Underserved communities towards spiritual, moral, social, and cultural development. So Afrodita is next. Thank you.
In this performance style presentation, my aim is to show that poetry can offer a tender encounter with neurodivergent experiences pertaining to disability, of mental illness, and experience of drugs. My presentation proposes that creativity in and of itself can cultivate a caring, tender regard of neurodivergent experience and humanize people's stories. And this matters because it can make visible the strengths and dignity of people whose stories or testimonies have historically been marginalized or dismissed in conversations about disability and within psychiatric treatment, which often leads to stigma and exclusion. And this dismissal is often well recognized as epistemic injustice. From a health perspective, epistemic injustice is where, and I quote here, ill persons are vulnerable to testimonial injustice through the presumptive attribution of characteristics like cognitive unreliability and emotional instability that downgrade the credibility of their testimonies. I am inspired by Graebe's suggestion that the neurodiversity movement is particularly well placed to bring together broader categories of marginalized peoples into a necessarily loose but nonetheless potentially hugely important solidarity network of movements fighting for radical acceptance of all types of human diversity under a broad banner of anti-normalization and challenges to supposedly, inverted commas, universal assumptions about human nature that privilege majority and historically dominant groups. Before I proceed, I would also like to stress that my presentation does not discard the value of medicine and treatment. It does not propose that the art or poetry necessarily will replace or should replace therapy, nor does it advocate that some forms of drug taking is a positive option for everyone. On the contrary, I believe that we need to be careful as a collective and on an individual level how social harms affect people's lives and their choices, to be aware that holistic education is crucial, and to be mindful of what feels right for who, in what circumstances, on what terms, and what point in time. And so with this in view, I think that bringing tenderness, which is a term that Anna Harping so well coined to talk about encountering mental illness, that we can bring tenderness to neurodiversity. And in fact, I would argue that poetry is necessary for epistemic justice, and it can amplify as well as celebrate the truth and the valid knowledge that different body minds bring. So for me personally, tender poetic encounter does not assume to repair what is impaired, but it simply asks and listens. What is it that you do that makes your life good and positive in spite of whatever circumstances you're in? And as Rice-Kemp argues, poetry offers a staunch refusal to allow language to cut up the world or cut groups of people from one another. In the words of autistic anthropologist Dawn Prince-Hughes, by using the language as a guide to destabilizing and ultimately dissolving boundaries between self and other, poetry may offer a guide to neuroatypicality that embraces rather than pathologizes difference. Poetic encounter with a world of cognitive and emotional difference must be experienced to be understood. So, on that note, in the next part of my presentation, I offer two of my own poems as a glimpse into experiences relating to dissociation and my past use of cannabis as a young person for self-searching. These poems are based on my own personal experiences, but in a semi-autobiographical manner. I use what is known as poetic license and reserve the right to use imagination to blur fact with fiction, because that gives me ownership and empowerment to talk about the truth of my subjective realities and emotions. So the first poem is presenting experiences of creative being and dissociation. Dissociation obviously has very different forms, and it has been linked to neurodiversity, as in the book by Susan Antoinette, who talks about dissociative identity disorder as well as bipolar identity disorder. However, in my poem, I talk about dissociation in the sense of what is known the multiple I, or rather multiple dissociated selves that I have used as a form of survival tactic, and they have actually brought me quite a lot of joy and comfort in extreme and difficult circumstances, distressing circumstances. So this is called a poetic disassociation, because for me, poetry is actually bringing the wholeness. The spoken word poem, I'd like to note, its rhythm and three characters of life, power, peace, and awareness are based on Jet Sweeney's original poem titled Right. I would really recommend for people to go on and listen to that as well. Poetic disassociation. Life, power, awareness, and peace arrive in the human body. Power says peace is interrupted at the collarbone, hard-won and historic. Awareness says peace looks like consciousness embodied. Power says peace looks fictional, but feels real. If the human body is a skeleton, building barriers around the heart doesn't make sense. If peace is interrupted, then life will become stubborn. Power is always fictional. You can't be who you cannot be. It's simply a fact. You can't be who you want to be. You're not there. That's why sheep are not people, but even sheep have the freedom to endure. If power hurts awareness and forgets it owes its strength to peace, when there is no more sunlight, will the ribcage reinvent itself? And if the forgetful slam doors shut and scream on top of their lungs, give me back peace, give me back peace, give me back peace, well, then life can't be restored, but it might be shallow. Aliveness is hinted at, but looks more like a cello. A sound instead of soul, no arms, no head. Look at it as being of non-being. Look at it as non-being of being. They stilled me to sit still as still can be, to still by force and still away what's not yours is not your right is not inalienable. To fight is to be hurt is like a body, say, a still body, inverted and betrayed. Betrayal still an act of peace. Your feet will lead you to it. But if your feet are a stomping block and forgetfulness, the stuff of mind, the body's frail, the body's null, the body's full of rage. You can't be who you cannot be. It's what they say. You can't be who you want to be. You can't want to be. In real life, it takes time to heal. Lies creep inside the body and start unsettling peace again and again. You don't need to listen to see. You can just close your eyes and breathe. You don't need to be perfect at it. You can just take a step and get it. I'm not more a piece than next door is. I'm not more next door than my piece is. I'm not more forgetful than dissociation. I'm not more a crime than powerful. Sitting still as still can sit, but still sitting. Pacify me. Pacify me, pacify me, give it back, give it back, give it back, give it back. It's my peace. When lies leave, power says, peace looks a lot like lies. Awareness cannot make up its mind. The second poem aims to present creative being and drug taking. I'm currently working on the Drug Policy Voices project at MNU that aims to include the voices of people with experiences of drug taking into the future of UK drug policy. And this is quite an eye-opening experience, as I think one of the participants was so articulate about saying how actually some instances of positive drug use can actually be in solidarity with the movement of neurodiverse movement and neurodivergent experiences. Before I read out this poem, I would actually also like to say, as a note, what I said previously. I really think that education is crucial, and I was quite inspired. I've worked previously with a young man who was involved in drug supply. And I think how stigma negatively can affect people's lives. And there's a project on called Cannabis and Psychosis, which explores the link between these two in creative ways based on lived experiences of young people. And I think for anyone interested to know more on that and educational resources, please do have a look at this project's website, cannabisandpsychosis.ca. However, my poem is more about a positive experience and trying to sort of blur the, again, fact and fiction, and using creative being. Some people use cannabis to alleviate pain or just for creative soul searching. So in my poem, this is what I do. Cannabis is meeting myself alive, backwards, back dive in a backdated life. Cannabis is the opposite of psychosis, united clock hands assembling the spine. A rhymester chiropractor at the coccyx, dissolve all toxic fears, dispel the shame at the sacrum, it is sacred being here. Climb up the lumbar, silent, a multi-rest music bar, arrest the thoracic and breathe. Sound is solvent for the sick. Inhale and be still at the cervical spine. Hold. Release in paper rolling, mobility, finger bones, typing. Some call it divine. Cannabis is a woman writing, thrown against the yellow wallpaper. Nobody touches this psychic me. Not alive, not alive. Nobody touches this psychic skin but me. Thrown against the yellow wallpaper. Cannabis is a woman writing, finger bones typing. Some call it divine release. In paper rolling, mobility, inhale and be still. At the cervical spine, hold. Sound is solvent for the sick. Arrest the thoracic and breathe. a multi-rest music bar, climb up the lumber, silent, it is sacred being here, dispel the shame at the sacrum, at the coccyx, dissolve or toxic fears, a rhymester, chiropractor, united. Glock hands assembling the spine, cannabis is the opposite of psychosis. Backwards, back dive in a backdated life, cannabis is meeting myself alive. So to kind of round off then with this quote, to go back again, for me, to be tender is not to assume that one should look to repair what's considered impaired, but to want to connect as people, to simply ask and listen to neuroatypical stories. What is it that you do that makes your life good and positive? An affirmative model of disabled identity that is consistent with the social disability model actually does not assign negative value to the physical or mental differences conventionally categorized as impairment, which is sometimes difficult to apply to traumatic events and mental distress. However, as Severies, who has worked closely with the poet Tito Mukhopadhyay, who is autistic, he argues that actually alternative embodiment of neuroatypical poets can give rise to both a different sense of relating and a different way with words. So I really hope that some of what I've shared today may be an entry point into that. So I'd really like to thank everyone, and if anyone who's listening feels that they want to explore creative ways to share a drug-related neurodivergent experience, please do have a look at the Drug Policy Voices website. These are some of the references if you want to sort of read a little bit more about this. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Afrodita. That was such a treat. And I love your proposal / provocation of poetry offering a creative tool of resistance and opening up this powerful liminal space and opening up this space to subvert and reclaim meaning. And it makes me think of all the dyslexic people around me who use words or abuse words, who love wordplay as a means to kind of take ownership of something that is quite tricky, quite out of control in some ways. I'm going to paste something in the chat line, and that might be for people who might be interested in kind of having further discussions about the kind of messy and magical entanglements between creativity and neurodiversity. So this is a network that myself and a colleague have co-founded, and it welcomes everybody from all walks, any walks of life, and neurodivergent or not, and allies. You're welcome to join in, and we like to talk about and share our experiments and talk about how neurodiversity and creative entanglements can occur and what that can lead to and so on. So you're welcome to join us. Last but not least, we have Isabel on the panel, and Isabel Spring is a disability advisor at MMU, Manchester Metropolitan University. She has an interest in neurodiversity and autism in particular. So we'll have Isabel share some of her thoughts with us, but also we want to have some time for discussion at the end. And there are a couple of questions that are already put forward. So everyone is welcome to share some of your thoughts or questions, and we'll try to pick up a couple of them at the end of today. So thank you. And Isabel, please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Kai. Really wonderful afternoon to be a part of, particularly performances which have been, as Kai said, a real treat. I've really enjoyed those. So thank you so much, Afrodita and Marina. They've been wonderful. As Kai has mentioned, I'm a disability advisor working in the Inclusion and Disability Service, and really we essentially just work extremely hard to remove the disadvantage for students, remove any disadvantage for students, and try and sort of level the playing field for a great number of students that are neurodivergent or perhaps have physical disabilities or sensory impairments, and really, just as I say, just sort of try and level that playing field and just sort of make sure they can achieve to absolutely their potential. In terms of sort of what I'm going to speak about, really, I think it's an opportunity to just provide some information for students that may have joined us that may not be aware of what we do and sort of how we do it. Students who register with us and who have personal learning plans, which I'll move on to in a moment, they will also have a case advisor for their time at the university. So it's an opportunity for you to sort of get to know your case advisor and really be seen as an individual, and make sure that the sort of learning plan is a document that is relevant and useful to you as an individual, really. So a personal learning plan contains reasonable adjustments to the delivery and assessment of courses. Obviously trying to sort of remove disadvantage without giving advantage over your sort of fellow students, really. So adjustments are typically made around exams, coursework, perhaps giving presentations, perhaps any placements that are involved in a program, practical sessions, and so on. So we just sort of, as I say, aim to level the playing field as far as possible and remove any sort of disadvantage whilst preserving obviously the integrity of your program. So they're sort of personal learning plans. In terms of sort of other support that's available to students, we will help with the process of applying for disabled students allowances as well, which is funds, DSA, disabled students allowances, is funds obviously provided by funding bodies which pay for additional support as required, which is as the direct result of a disability. And I think Siobhan mentioned in her little segment earlier, there is a disability is a contentious term, and you know, I understand there is some sort of tension around that. We could sort of be looking at, in terms of the support that's given through DSAs, we could be looking at sort of computer equipment, assistive technology, specialist study skills or specialist mentor support, and that's all sort of aimed again at sort of, you know, further removing any sort of disadvantage and giving sort of students the tools and sort of equipment they may need to help them in their program. They're the sort of very formal support structures, really. There are sort of a couple more sort of informal support sort of initiatives, really, that have been put in place. We do have a team of peer mentors who work in the first term of each academic year, make themselves available in a series of meetings and events during the first term to new students who join the university, many of whom do identify as being neurodivergent. And the aim is obviously to sort of provide a safe space to sort of speak to other students who've navigated the university systems and so on, and to sort of really help new students settle in. We've also just started a social group for students on the autism spectrum. Again, this is to provide a safe space, and this is particularly a safe and sort of student-led space for students on the spectrum to connect with each other and see where they sort of want to take it, really. We've had one meeting so far, which has been online via Zoom, that was pretty well attended, and it was a really positive sort of first meeting. It went sort of very well, and we would encourage anybody who wants to sort of get involved in that, to please contact us and get involved in that as well. But really, it's that's sort of generally what the Inclusion and Disability Service do. I don't know if there are any questions. More than happy to answer those in the Q&A session, which I think is coming up shortly.